going to talk about blankets because if you've crocheted anything before or even just have an appreciation for crocheting, you have seen some amazing crocheted blankets out there. Something like this or like this, or even the granny square style blankets like this. These are fantastic. And they're really great projects if you have the time and the money to spend on the yarn that you need for them, as well as just the amount of patience it requires to complete something like this. Now, if you are super into making blankets and you love doing these really intricate patterns, sorry, I couldn't think of the word, these really intricate patterns, then go for it. I'm not saying don't make something like this because this is amazing. I wish I had the patience to make something like this, but I do not. So I'm gonna tell you the way that I would make a blanket, the way that I do make blankets. In fact, it was the way that I made blankets for probably the first 10 or so years that I started crocheting, because I wanted to be able to make blankets, particularly baby blankets, but I wanted something that looked beautiful, that did not look as simple as it was. It looked like I had spent a lot more time on it, but that really did not take me more than a week or two to finish the project, depending on how much time I could spend on it each day. So I'm going to share with you what my opinion is in terms of the best way to make a quick blanket. Now, you can go on the internet and you can find things like 6-hour blankets, and you can find things like quick patterns for quick crochet blankets and stuff like that. Those are fine too, and some of them may very well follow a similar pattern to what I would do, but mine is repetitive. You basically chain, and then you're just going to use double crochets. Now I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, but that's basically what it is. You need to know how to do a chain stitch, a double crochet stitch, and just to make it all nice and clean, we're also going to do a single crochet border around the edge. You're going to end up with a project that looks something like this. This is one that I actually made. This is a baby blanket. It is a small baby blanket, something that could be tossed in a car seat or that the baby can be laid on in the floor. But this is basically what we're going for. Now, the way that I achieve this, because I think this looks really fantastic, is by using these variegated yarns with a double crochet stitch. That's it. That's basically it. So I'm going to tell you the materials that you're going to need, and then I'm going to tell you the, I believe, 4 steps. I need to just think through it for actually accomplishing this. Now, I'm not telling you how to make a granny square blanket, because while these are fantastic and they're beautiful and they can be fun to make, most of the time I am not interested in making 400 granny squares or 300 granny squares or even 100 granny squares so that I can make a small blanket, because then I have to sew them all together and I have to weave in all the ends and then I have to add the border, and it's so much work. This is what I consider to be the quickest way to make a nice blanket. So these are the materials you're going to need. You're going to need an 8mm crochet hook and a 9mm crochet hook. Now, I'll explain why you need 2 crochet hooks for one project in just a minute, but you are going to need an 8mm and a 9mm crochet hook. You're going to need a darning needle for weaving in the ends, because though you don't have as many ends to weave in as you're going to have with the granny squares, you're still going to have to weave in 3 or 4 ends, depending on how you crochet over things and stuff like that. And then you're going to need the variegated yarn of your choice. I personally like the brunette blanket. There's a lot of really pretty variegated colors that it comes in, but I've used other things. I also like the new Big Twist Posh, but you could also use the Big Twist, I think it's called Baby Bear, if you're making a baby blanket or something. That is a slightly thinner yarn than this, but it'll still work up quicker than an acrylic yarn like this would. So that's what you're going to need. Depending on the size of your project, that's going to depend on how much you're going to need. If you're going to do an adult Afghan, I would say that you're going to need at least 6 skeins. If you're doing a baby blanket, you're going to need at least 2 skeins. Also, grab one skein of a border color. Doesn't really matter what color you're going to use. You can decide what color looks best, but make sure that it is the same type of yarn. So if you're going to be using the Bernette variegated, the Bernette blanket variegated, then use the Bernette blanket in a solid color for your border as well. This is just going to make it have a nice, pretty, clean look. You're not really going to need any stitch markers for this project because we're just going to be going back and forth. You're basically going to get to the end of the row. You're going to chain 2 and then turn it and then just keep going back and forth. And then the same whenever we go in and add our single crochet border, you're just going to go all the way around and then you'll be done. So you don't really need any stitch markers, but you will want a pair of scissors for whenever you have to cut off the yarn at the end when you're finishing off the main part of the blanket and then when you're finishing off the border. So that's really all that you're going to need for this project. So let's get into how I would make this. Step 1, you're going to take your bigger crochet hook and you're going to chain the length of your blanket. Now, we want to use the bigger crochet hook because if you don't use a bigger crochet hook, once you start getting into your blanket, you'll notice that the end is about this long or this wide, and then it's going to start getting wider as you get away from that chain stitch. So it's going to be oddly shaped and you really can't stretch it out or block it or clean it up with a border. You can try, but I have failed many times because I did not chain in a bigger size hook. So chain whatever the length of your blanket is going to be. I don't even use a stitch count usually for the length of my blanket. I will just take and I will crochet the length that I want it and then add 2 stitches to that. The reason you're adding 2 stitches is because that's going to make the first double crochet of the first row. And then you'll notice that we will chain at the end of each row as well because we want to make sure we have that height for the row. So go ahead and once you have chained those 2 stitches, switch out your crochet hook to the smaller size. So you're going to grab your 8mm crochet hook, slip it in, and then you are going to crochet, do a double crochet in the 3rd stitch from the hook. So the first 2 stitches are going to be your double crochet. It will represent your first double crochet, and then the 3rd stitch will be where you're actually forming the 2nd double crochet. Then double crochet all the way across. Once you get to the end of the row, chain 2, turn your work, and then double crochet all the way across. You're going to do this repeatedly. You're just going to repeat that row over and over and over again until you get to the length. Now, I'm not going to tell you how much that's going to be, how many rows that's going to be, because honestly, it's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on your tension. It's going to depend on the exact yarn that you're using. It's going to depend on the length of the blanket that you want. So I'm not going to give you any specific measurements or number of rows that you're going to need because there are many factors that are going to determine that. Once you get to the end, you're going to tie it off, finish it off, weave in that end on, and you can weave in both ends at your starting point and your ending point so that you don't have to worry about them later. Then for our border, you're going to take the 8mm crochet hook. You're going to slip stitch in with the border color anywhere on the edge of the blanket. It does not matter where you start because you're just going to go all the way around the blanket. Slip stitch in, and then I would recommend doing a single crochet border because it's simple. It doesn't add a whole lot of extra width or length to your blanket, and it's just super basic, but that one little thin single crochet border will make a big difference in just the cleanness of the blanket. Now, you don't have to add a border to it if you don't want to. There's no reason really other than it just makes it look a little bit cleaner. If you get to the end of your blanket and you're like, I am done, I don't want to do any more of this, I finished, it's good enough. That's fine. It is entirely up to you, but I personally think that adding a single crochet border just cleans it up a little bit. And then once you get all the way back around, you single crochet in each. When you are working on the edges where you have double crochets, I would recommend doing 2 single crochets in each of the double crochets. That's what I do personally. Somebody may tell you something otherwise, but that's what I do personally on my blankets. And then you will end up with, again, something like this. Once you finish, you just finish it off. You weave in your ends. I tie mine just to make sure that they don't go anywhere, especially if it's like a baby blanket, because babies tend to pick at things. So that's pretty much it, though. It's, again, this is probably not something that you're gonna whip up in 5 hours, 6 hours. Maybe, depending on the size, if it's a baby blanket, you could, but I would say give yourself a week, maybe 2, depending on the size that you want it to be, and see how it goes. If you start out with something that's really, really long, you could do the length of the blanket instead of the width of the blanket. Or you can do the width of the blanket and then you work the length of the blanket. It kind of depends on the way that you want the variegation to look on the blanket, and play around with it. I've had some really pretty things that I've done both ways, some really pretty blankets that I've done both ways. I think my pride and joy in terms of blankets that I have made, though, is this rainbow blanket, because I used a rainbow variegated yarn. I don't remember what brand it was. It was something I got while I was living in China. And then I used a white border and then just did a ruffle border to, which is basically just multiple double crochets in a single stitch. And I just did that, and it just looks so beautiful to me. I mean, this is my own opinion. It's my own blanket. I'm a little bit biased, but for something that I was able to work up relatively quickly, and something that all it did was do double crochets, and really this one only had the chain and the double crochets, I think that this turned out absolutely perfect. So I hope this is helpful for you. I hope that you don't get started on a blanket and then decide that you don't want to finish it because it takes a lot of time. I really hope that you understand that even something like this that should work up pretty quickly is still going to take time. It's still going to require you to sit there and do the same stitches back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And for some people that gets really boring really fast and you just can't do it. I understand. I totally understand. Projects that are too repetitive for me, I have to take them in small strides. So I may do, for this blanket, I did one color every like 2 or 3 days because I was working the length of this blanket. And now this is a 6-foot blanket, so it's quite a lot. But I was working the length of this blanket, and it took me about 3 days, I would say, to finish one of the stripes of color. And just looking at it, this is 1, 2, 3. This is 3 rows of double crochets, but this one's slightly different because I actually did single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, double crochet. So it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of single crochet and 3 rows of double crochet. Again, I wouldn't recommend that unless it's something that you really, really want to do, because it's not necessary if you're using this variegated stuff. It really wasn't necessary here either. It's just how I decided to make this blanket. But that's all that I really have. If you have any questions about how I do my blankets, or you want to see some more examples of it, I have plenty of pictures. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I am definitely open to trying to help people figure out what works best. I don't consider myself an amazing like crochet blanket wizard, because I'm not going to make stuff like this. I'm not, because I don't have the patience or the attention span to do something like this. It's a lot of work. It is beautiful, and I applaud anybody that can do it. But if you are like me, you likely have ADHD and you just can't stand to sit there for extended periods of time and work on the same project for months at a time, then I would recommend trying this method, because you can finish a good sized blanket in a week or 2 if you put a little bit of effort into it every day, just doing the double crochets back and forth. So grab your hooks, grab your yarn, go find your whatever you're binge watching on Netflix, or for me, I've started listening to audiobooks, and get started. And I'd love to see some of the stuff that you actually make. So if you make a blanket using my technique, what I recommend, and I'm not going to say I'm the only person that does this, but it's just how I do it. send me a message on Instagram. I would love to see your pictures, or tag me in a post on Instagram so that I can see what you've worked on, because I think this is a fun way to make a blanket. I think it's quick, and I think that if you are one of those like instant reward types of people where you really need to have something come together quickly, but you want to make a bigger project, that this will be the route to go. Again, the one thing to also to think about, the chunkier the yarn, the faster it can work up. But if you're using something bigger than the Bernat blanket, you're probably going to want to get a bigger hook size. Just keep that in mind whenever you're working with bigger yarn. But again, thank you so much for coming, and again, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.